Who would have thought Sony might be getting back into the handheld game? I would have never thought this. I figured after the Vita, they realized, you know what, the handheld market isn't really for us. Nintendo has that pretty much on lockdown. Not much reason in competing there. Let's jump back to the home market where the PS4 is obviously taken over. And let's just full steam ahead with that. Forget the Vita kind of existed and it'll slowly fade out. That was my initial thoughts. And now some interesting stuff has surfaced online that may hint that Sony is still interested in being a part of that handheld market. And I can kind of understand this considering Japan, which of course Sony and Nintendo are both based out of Japan. The Japanese audience is very interested in handheld systems. They really like portability, they really like cell phones and tablets, and in this case, I think it's pretty obvious that they are very interested in the Switch. So yesterday, a patent was made public, and a lot of us kind of found it today, and this patent was filed by Sony back in 2015, but again, most patents aren't public until a little later on, and now this one is public. What you're about to see, it will probably look very, very familiar to the Switch because it looks almost exactly like it, probably just the Switch in like its almost its prehistoric time, because this is a very archaic looking system compared to the Switch. Now, keep in mind, most patents, when they are first filed and initially drawn up, are drawn to purposely not look exactly like the final product, because when this stuff does go public, competitors can take a look at it and start to possibly try to imitate it or make it better. I think if this actually came to market, it would look different. I think it would probably end up looking a lot sleeker, I will say that, more ergonomic, because this does not look very portable, and it just doesn't look like a very comfortable system to really use. So what you're seeing here are the actual drawings for this patent. Now, it's a pretty standard looking device. It's almost like the tablet's in the middle. Then you have the two controllers on the sides that do look like, not really look like the Joy-Cons, but they resemble the obvious idea that the Joy-Cons represent, which are controllers on the sides that you would think would be detachable, but after looking at the back of this thing, they don't really look like they're very detachable. They look like they're stuck to it. Now, again, that could be just the look of the drawing, and maybe the idea is for them to be detached, and you're able to take it with you on the go, put it down, and then take the controller parts off, much like the Switch. And yeah, this thing really resembles the Switch, which is very interesting because, again, this was filed back in 2015, which means they were drawing this thing up before then. The Vita was obviously on its way out at that time, so if they were going to do handheld stuff, they would have started to come up with or at least conceptualize an idea probably at the beginning of 2015. And I don't think this is new at all, because a lot of these companies have divisions that are just constantly working on new stuff, new ideas, throwing stuff at a wall, seeing what sticks, having meetings all the time about how they can make stuff thinner and smaller. That's why you see, obviously, slim consoles come out, new console revisions come out a lot, because these companies are paying people to constantly figure this stuff out. Which leads us to the next point. Just because this patent is out there, filed, and public, does not necessarily mean that they are building a handheld. That's not what this completely means, but it does mean that the thought is in their head, at least, to consider a possible successor to the Vita. Now, the Vita, of course, had a lot of struggles. Its memory cards certainly did not help. I think that really hurt it and helped the 3DS, because you could obviously get a much cheaper SD card for the 3DS than the Vita. I don't think it was really as many characters were a difference. For example, like the Dreamcast really suffered because it didn't have a big character. The Vita at least had a lot of Sony's characters going forward. They could have first-party games on there. Of course, Uncharted was there. Crash Bandicoot could now go to it. And they have their long list of libraries for PS1 and what could probably be PS2 games as well. Now, the thing that really killed the Vita, obviously, were the memory cards. And then Alright, so Sony really dropped that system quick. I mean, quick. They were out the door after the first couple years when they realized that the 3DS was just going to destroy the system. And it kind of did. I mean, the Vita really stood no chance after a while, with Nintendo constantly throwing exclusives. It had Pokemon, which really, guys, let's be honest, Pokemon is a huge deciding factor for that 3DS system. I mean, it's a massive seller. It brings the audience to the 3DS. And it's pretty funny because obviously the 3DS is less powerful than the Vita by a decent amount, but it still won because it had the games. Like I've said before, guys, games sells hardware. Hardware doesn't sell hardware. I guess the next question, at least for me, would be what exactly would Sony use in this handheld for hardware, because keep in mind, Nvidia and Nintendo are pretty much locked up. I mean, they are signed, they're together, and I don't think Nvidia would turn around and then go to Sony and help them make a handheld. I think that's probably in their agreement that whatever this customized chip that's in the Switch is, it's staying with the Switch and it's staying with Nintendo. And of course, I think Nvidia is more about supporting Nintendo going forward than trying to then go to another company like a Sony or like a Microsoft and help them develop a handheld. So of course, we already know that Sony is partnered with AMD at least to develop the chips for the PS4. And yes, AMD ATI do have low power equivalents to like what the Tegras are, and those are their AMD Merlin Falcon chips. Now, we talked about the Smok Z and how that handheld used a Falcon chipset to achieve what appears to be anywhere between 500 and 750 gigaflops at floating point 32, which, yes, should be enough to play things like Skyrim, stuff like that through a Windows machine. But here's the thing, if Nintendo and Nvidia are willing to develop a very custom chip, because trust me, the chip in that Switch is not an X1, it's some kind of customized chip. It's certainly, it could be based on Maxwell architecture, but I don't think it's an exact X1 just dropped right on the board. So what would happen is Sony would go to AMD and have them develop a custom chip that would probably be very similar to like the AMD Falcon, their Merlin chipset. Like, for example, the Smok Z uses an RX 421BD, and this is actually a pretty good chip for the low power draw, and it actually sits at 2.1 gigahertz. And that's just a low powered APU. It actually uses like a Radeon R7 type graphics chip with a frequency of 800 megahertz. Not bad. Of course, houses 4 gigs of RAM. This is, of course, the Smok Z specs. And that could be something that Sony may be looking at and saying, look, AMD can already develop a chip that would be similar to the Tegra chip, not exactly the same. Again, I think Nvidia has the edge on AMD with the portable market as well, which I think is one of the reasons that Nintendo went to Nvidia, because they realized that they are much more interested in developing their Tegra chips, since those are the baseline that's going into these self-driving cars, and Nvidia knows that they can get a little extra money, probably actually more than a little at this point, by developing the chips for the Switch and that underlying technology, so they can develop them for the self-driving cars, and they can develop it for Nintendo's handheld. AMD ATI are not they're not really pushing their mobile chipset as much, especially not this Merlin and Falcon chip, especially since they're busy with their Ryzen chips and their Vega GPUs. I think they're more interested in developing those than really jumping on this low-powered system on a chip equivalent to the Tegra. But if Sony came to their doorstep and said, hey, we want to develop this system, we think we can push 20 to 30 million in the first couple of years, let's do it. Sony's going to do it, and AMD are going to sign up, and they're going to get it done. Now, the filing here, the patents and everything, they show some stuff, but not really a lot. A lot of it is to be determined. It's TBD for a lot of this stuff. And the big things that I did notice on the top, they have things marked out like where the SIM card, it actually says slots for a SIM card and memory card. They're right at the top. They're ones you'd have like almost like a little pin spot is there that you have on the side of a cell phone, but you have a memory card slot and a SIM card slot. Not surprising, considering that obviously the Vita used a 3G connection that was not good enough to play games over, but would let you do stuff like Nier. And at this point, 4G or 4G LTE would be pretty much standard, and you would actually be able to play some games over that, no problem. Again, the rest of it is not really described well. Now you have, of course, the screen on the front. There's no measurement given for that, so we don't know how big their screen would be. This thing could be small, it could be huge. We don't know just based on this drawing, because there's no measurements given that I could find. I will leave the link for you guys down below in the description so you can check out the patent filings for yourself. Maybe you can come across something I missed. I implore you to go through and see if you can find something, because maybe there's something cool in there that I'm missing, and you can leave it down in the comments below. But yeah, guys, let me know what you think about this down in the comments below. I do think Sony still wants to be a part of the handheld market. I think because of their Japanese ties, obviously, to that culture, and that culture is really big on mobile gaming right now. I feel like they want to be part of handheld gaming, and I feel like if they did this, they would view their competitor to be more of the 3DS and not the Switch, because this would probably not hook up to a TV, although I could be wrong about that, obviously, but I think they would target the 3DS as their competitor rather than the Switch, because of course the Vita was already stronger than 3DS. They could put out a next-gen Vita and it would still be much stronger than the 3DS, and maybe not as powerful as a Switch, but they could still get away with that and call it a true successor to the Vita, and compete with the 3DS, really. I mean, they could try. I don't think it would work well, again, because the 3DS and Nintendo have the games, specifically Pokemon, Mario. Obviously, those kind of games. Fire Emblem is really big over there, and Monster Hunter. So Sony would have to do some big things to make that happen. So you never know. Maybe that's why their president was at the Switch convention that they had in Tokyo, looking around and taking pictures. Maybe this is why. So let me know what you guys think down below. I will see you next time.